How'd you guys meet? Craigslist misconnections. What was it? How did you two come together?
I think I'll lead off, Jeremy. Jeremy and I are first cousins. So we met pretty much, I think, a little after Jeremy's birth. And, we've actually been in contact since then, believe it
Right
or
on.
not. So you could say we've not only grown quite close, but our families are close as well.
That's very interesting. I got to tell you, 400 plus episodes in, first time that's ever happened. Well, then independently, share the path that led to Moody Tongue. Start me off, Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think at its heart, Moody Tongue is really an extension of Jared and his background. Jared is a classically trained chef. He worked at a number of, similar to your background, Michelin accoladed fine dining establishments before beginning to brew. And I'll let him speak to his background a little bit more so. However, prior to opening Moody Tongue, Jared was a brewmaster at Goose Island here in Chicago. And for some time, he had really hit kind of the culmination of his career, at least at that point, in terms of learning both the culinary side of the industry and the brewing side of the industry, and looking to, transition that into, a business, frankly. And my background is on the business side. While prior to opening Moody Tongue with Jared, I worked in more investment-centric roles. My interest, my passion had been entrepreneurship for a while. It's what I studied in school. And frankly, I was looking at a number of different opportunities before craft beer fell into my lap. And Jared had approached me to help put together a business plan. I said, if you send me a few cases of beer, I'm more than happy to write that for you. But the more I had looked, and this is now, at this point, probably 12, 13 years ago, the more I'd looked into what was going on in the world of craft beer, I saw the explosion that was really happening. And, frankly, you sit there in, class and business school, and how often do you have the opportunity to see the beginning of an industry life cycle unfold right in front of you? And so, I obviously worked in depth with Jared, but also a number of folks and kind of tangentially around Jared within the beer industry. And I thought, not only is there something very exciting about what's going on in the world of beer right now, but I think more importantly, Jared has a very unique approach to beer and brewing, and a very unique product, right? Beer. And the more that I learned about what Jared had been doing professionally, and the more I understood about his background from a training standpoint, education standpoint, and an experiential standpoint, I understood also that there was a real barrier to entry in terms of anyone trying to replicate what we were hoping to do, which, as you probably know, is, merging the worlds of beer and food, right? Looking at beer like food, right? With layers of flavors and aromatics, but also more recently over the last 5-6 years, joining into the restaurant side of the industry, where, we create, I'd say, fine dining establishments that showcase beer as a beverage pairing or a beverage medium, right? So anyways, it's really, Jared's background is much more on the culinary side. My background is more on the business side. We're very much like two different sides of yin and yang, or two different sides of the brain. And yeah, while we are definitely family and we've known each other for a very long time, I do feel we do a great job of staying in our lanes. And this year, I suppose, ironically, is our 10th year in business. So our first beers were produced in the summer of 2014.
Let's talk about this. It does. And I want to dig a bit deeper into your side, Jeremy, because I think it is most interesting to talk about you and how you got into the industry. Jared, it makes sense, right? Like classically trained chef, they work for a bunch of great places, decides he wants to open his own, right? That totally makes sense. But on your side, you're weighing out other opportunities. How did you reconcile the failure rate in the industry at large with the other opportunities that you were considering at the time as it relates to your entrepreneurial lead?
It's a fantastic question. I was looking at a number of different industries from an entrepreneurial perspective, from a startup perspective, prior to honing in to food and beverage, and obviously specifically here, craft beer. Look, there's certainly a high failure rate in our industry, but I have a general belief that, you have a great product at a great price, you will be successful. And I think we have not only a unique story, but I think that the beers that Jared creates and has overseen the creation of are exceptional. And so as a starting point, I thought we had a fantastic product. Right now, certainly 5-6 years later, jumping into the restaurant industry, I would suggest there is maybe statistically a greater risk, the traditional retail side of the business. But again, I think it's just like any industry. If you underwrite the business appropriately, right, you have a reasonable conservative forecast on your sales, on your expenses, on your margins, most importantly, and you feel strongly about your concept, then you'll perform well. Whether or not you make a significant amount of profit or a little amount of profit, is up to, I think, an element that's wholly out of our control, right? What I would probably suggest is within hospitality, there is a bigger variable that is just luck than a lot of other industries, right? At the end of the day, you may have a delicious beer or a fantastic restaurant concept, but, just like you saw going through 2020 with COVID, you can't control a lot of elements in the world. And, when most restaurants carry maybe 60, 90 days of working capital on hand, and all of a sudden, local governments, mandate the shutdown of on-premise business, there's nothing you can do, right? That's luck or bad luck, unfortunately. So, look, I think what excited me about the industry was certainly a love and passion for food and beverage. And obviously I was excited to work with Jared, who I think is incredibly talented, but most importantly, if I'm going to take a risk on something, why not do it in a field that we're passionate about and interested in? But then, do our darndest to make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's when we're underwriting the business, right? That, equipment for brewing is expensive, right? Make sure you're speaking to all the different manufacturers. Make sure you're speaking, when you're opening a restaurant, not just to others in the neighborhood and the community, but, others who, will become your vendors, your guests, all the valuable partners who make you part of the hospitality community.
And then Jared, how did you triage in your mind? So when I look at chefs, and I've worked with many, creative control is incredibly important, right? That we are meeting the expectations and the vision of the chef that is the captain of the ship. But what makes you a great chef a lot of the time hurts you in other areas, right? How could you be world-class at so many things at once? But what the industry charges us with is being good at so many things at once, right? There aren't that many chefs that are great businessmen, and there aren't that many great businessmen that are chefs, right? So in deciding to take the entrepreneurial leap, when you initially reached out to Jeremy, it was for help with a business plan. But at what point did you decide that you wanted to focus on your core competencies, right, and bring in someone else that could assist with everything else?
At the very beginning, I think understanding your strengths and weaknesses are important, but also challenging. I have a pretty good idea what I'm good at, and I have a pretty good idea what I'm not good at. And so for things that are not my strengths or my passion, I try to surround myself with super talented people. Jeremy just happens to be someone that was a first cousin as well, and really, really intelligent and had a strong understanding of business and loved business as much as I love beer. So it was a really good match. And it's become fun because of that. Like having defined roles in our company has been really helpful for all of our team members. And for me, I see it as a luxury.
Well, and talk to me about that. So how do you stay in your own lanes? A quote that I heard from my business coach is, your success in life is directly related to your ability to have difficult conversations. So you started as cousins. There's a known intimacy there, right? There's a knowing that exists. And then you transition into a professional relationship, which I'm sure was really fun at first and then became progressively less fun until it became more fun again. And that's the ebbs and the flows, right? In any particular business, you are either coming out of crisis, in crisis, or going into the next crisis. So how do you guys weather the storm, honoring your roles, but still honoring the partnership as well?
I think for us, at the very beginning of this, we actually sat down and put all our fears out on the table. And for me, that was really cleansing. It gave Jeremy an idea of what was going on in my head, and it also gave me an idea of what was going on in his head. And let me just tell you, if we didn't have that chat, I think I think communication and understanding each other would have been a lot more difficult down the line. So once we put it on the table, then I think both of us, as a result, have become sensitive to certain quirks and allowed us to really just communicate with each other on what's important instead of things that just might be a distraction.
I think, Josh, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It really comes down to open communication. Unfortunately, I think folks are not always the best at communicating what their concerns are, what their fears are, what their hopes are, what their interests are, where they think, there may be a good idea, where they think there may not be a good idea. So I think at the heart of any good business is exceptional communication. And unfortunately, sometimes that's tough and difficult because I think people naturally have an aversion to not agreeing with other people. It's okay not to agree, right? Jared and I have been in business together for 10 plus years now. We don't agree on everything, but it's important to talk through the merits of every option, opportunity, or whatever it may be that presents itself. But let me also speak to, you talk about staying in our lanes. Jared and I don't cover every lane at Moody Tongue. And I think there's something to be important here, which is the fact that we've built a really wonderful team as well. And I know you talk a lot about this, on the podcast as well, right? At the heart of Moody Tongue, we are a small business. And a small business is just an extension of the people who make it up, right? And we have a lot of wonderful folks every day, whether it's, on the production side within the brewery, on the sales side, actually meeting with accounts, whether it's on the restaurant side in Chicago, whether it's on the restaurant side in New York or elsewhere. Jared and I don't cover all the ground, but what we try to do is we try to bring people onto the team who are fantastic at what they do, and then let them build the role in which they are most interested, right? If I would say we have a belief that if you work with people and let them do what they're passionate about, you'll end up with a better work product, right? And so, I think it's important to say that, yes, Jared and I do very well at staying in our own lanes. Jared always likes to joke, I love Excel as much as he loves beef. I'm not an expert in other components of our business. And for that, we rely on our team members. And we have a number of wonderful team members who have experience in a variety of backgrounds that make up Moody Tongue what is Moody Tongue. I think at our foundation, yes, there was a point in time when it was literally Jared and me inside the tanks scrubbing and cleaning every frickin' day, and then going back and, he'd be meeting with folks, trying to taste out on our beers, or I'd be like speaking with our landlord or our accountant or our attorney, right? But now, we have a much larger team, and we're only able to accomplish what we are doing because we have the input of so many incredible folks. So there was a genesis with us, but Moody Tongue really is an entity that's much larger than ourselves.
Well, and I love the idea of just leaving people to their own devices. Follow your passions, do your best, work really hard. But alignment is like a huge part of that, right? And making sure that everybody's rowing in the right direction, which the best tool I've found is like outcome-based leadership, right? What is your goal? Tie it to a number. Let's track it week by week, month by month. Is that how you're managing the team? How do you guys manage your leadership team?
I wouldn't say we have like a specific outcome per se, right? I think we have like ongoing metrics that we review. From my court, it might be more financial, perhaps in measure, looking at margins within the restaurants, your operating margins, your gross margins, et cetera. With Jared, it'll certainly be more food, beverage, and service centric, right? He'll be jumping into the restaurant and working either with our culinary teams or our service teams and the like. But generally trying to head in one direction, right? We've always said, we've had this sort of Michelin mindset, which I think is like a driving belief, irrespective of the accolade itself, but in terms of the quality of the experience, the food and the beverage that we try to produce, right? And maybe we put this perspective on a pedestal because we never actually want to achieve it. But I think if you have a distinct objective measure, you may overfocus on that measure and forsake another piece of the business. In other words, if you say, I need to reach a 20%, return or margin on some line in your financial, you may start cutting an ingredient that is really what made that dish or that beer exceptional. I don't know that we have the perfect equation, for the perfect business necessarily, but for us, I think it's about collaboratively working to have the best product, the best service, and the best experience, And, frankly, my job is to make sure we can do it without losing money. And as long as we can do that, we've got, happy folks on the team. We have happy partners and we have happy guests.
I want to talk about the expansion into restaurants because the way I envision it in my mind is like you and Jared are sitting and it's like a dark room, you're splitting a bottle of wine, and you turn to him and you say, Jared, we're making too much money. We got to figure out how to burn as much cash as is humanly possible as quickly as possible. And he turns to you and he goes, let's open restaurants.
That's I like what you just put out there, but that's not how it went down. First of all, it was a beer, not a bottle of wine.
There we go.
And the room was a little bit lighter. The truth is, I always wanted to open a restaurant from the very beginning. But I knew that in order to open the restaurant that I was interested in opening, I had to learn a lot of things beforehand. Whether it was going to culinary school and then after that working at Michelin restaurants in order to understand really like what that level looked like and how to get there and surround myself with people that have already gotten there. And so I took a strong education path. And from there, starting with the brewery, I thought the next focus should be on making excellent beer and learning that business and being the best brewmaster I could possibly be. And then at that point, when I felt comfortable and really proud of the beer we were creating, then I said, okay, let's explore a restaurant. Let's surround ourselves with the most talented people, front of the house and back of the house, and start from there. And we had a pretty clear vision of what we wanted to do. Jeremy mentioned it earlier. It's taking beer with elevated food and bring these two worlds together, which has been my mission from the very beginning. Since starting a brew club at the Culinary Institute of America and starting to bring in a beer, not only as a pairing item, but also as an ingredient, whether it was savory or sweet, and then just keep pushing, where so many restaurants that I admired, whether when I was working in Napa or New York, they had excellent wine lists, excellent food menus, great coffee, great tea, but the beer list was always lacking. And for me, I saw a big opportunity there. And so I planted this seed a long time ago. Jeremy really helped us bring it to fruition with Moody Tongue.
Well, what?
By the way, it was more than one beer.
I'm sure it was.
It was actually, Josh, every Thanksgiving, I brought home kegs of beer. And it was actually, when we were putting a herd on this Oktoberfest, that I looked to Jeremy, I was like, hey, I need some help with a business plan. Like this is the vision, this is the direction. Can you help me get there? And he just made, he took whatever business plan I put together and cleaned it up. And since then it was just about, hey, okay, like send me some information on the cost of malt, hops, brewing equipment. And then he would take that information, digest it, and then he would put the next goal in front of us. And we just kept pushing towards it. It started as a brewery and then it moved into a restaurant. Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
Josh, I think this speaks to, a question or a part of the conversation a little bit earlier, which was, look, the restaurant industry is incredibly tough. And if you look just at the statistics, you could easily be dissuaded from opening a restaurant. But I think that's one of the reasons that we tried to spend so much time kind of getting experience or doing research, right? Trying to perfect one thing before the next thing, right? We opened our first restaurant in 2019. We didn't open our second restaurant, granted there was COVID, until 2023. We're not trying to take over the world. We're just trying to make sure that what we do, we can execute exceptionally well and mitigate any sort of risk. And the restaurant industry is wild, right? Maybe we're crazy for trying to jump into this business. And obviously, from your experience very well, all the different sides of this industry. But it was definitely more than one beer over a longer period of time. And while our business foundation is in the wholesale production of beer, and while our brand and our philosophy is in elevating, that beer-centric dining experience, we didn't want to open a restaurant until we thought we could compete with similar experiences. We weren't opening a restaurant for the sake of opening a restaurant. Otherwise, we just keep trying to make beer and sell beer, right? And package new formats of beer and open new distribution markets, right? We only wanted to open a restaurant once we thought we had a genuinely unique approach to an experience that folks here in the city of Chicago would appreciate and enjoy. So yeah, we opened in 2014. We capitalized in 2012. Our first restaurant wasn't until November of 2019, right? So it took a little time.
Though. It does. Like it's, you can look at examples from in the industry or outside the industry. It's very easy to get rich slow, right? It is very hard to get rich quick. I was talking to my wife actually about the two of you based on the research I did. And I was like, these are like two of the most focused, linearly thinking, well-adjusted human beings I think I've ever interviewed. I do a bunch of coaching and consulting in this space. And like never have I gone into a business and like added to it. Right? It's always about stripping away the bullshit, the things that are not profitable, are not interesting. And ultimately what you're left with is a business very similar to the one you're running, which is what I want to talk about next, which is like the power of focus and intention. Right? It is to describe this as, a pairing of food and beer doesn't describe like the severity of the extreme. Like you've elevated it to an art form. And I don't say that to be complimentary. I say it because you're literally doing something that no one else is doing. And like how exciting and terrifying simultaneously, right? It goes back to that Henry Ford quote that if I did what people asked for, I would have built a faster horse, right? Nobody was asking for the thing that you built and people fucking love it. But like, how did you know that there was product market fit?
It's a great question. I think, look, our family's from Kentucky. Our moms, Phyllis and Maxine, would love a Derby reference. And I think we put our blinders on just like we're running a race. A lot of times folks also ask us, are we going to make a non-alcoholic beer? Are we going to make a seltzer, right? How do you devise that business plan? From day one, it has been culinary brewing, right? Beer that is approachable, sessionable, and showcases profile, particular flavor or aromatic profiles. When we grew into the restaurant, it was a very narrow focus too. I think at the crux of what we do, we have a very genuine belief that there is an interest in beer as a beverage, and there's an interest in food and foodies, right? And since day one for our business, we've always had, the same kind of guest demographic, right? Folks who enjoy eating and drinking. And frankly, that's me and Jared too, right? So it's very easy for us to understand our guest because our guest is us, right? So yes, we're hyper-focused. We have never, ciders came up. We didn't create a cider. Seltzers came up. We didn't create a seltzer, right? We're very focused on what we do. Now, to speak to your point, yes, you can jump into a business and trim, right? A business that may have just some sales and then you're trying to chase margin, right? And you're trying to bring your food costs down, your alcohol costs down, right? Or on the production side, you're trying to bring your grain bill down or your hop bill down or whatever it may be. For us, we've never looked at the business that way. We've actually started the inverse in terms of building up. Let me give you a good example. The first beer we ever bottled, crazy enough, was a shaved black truffle Pilsner, right? We took one of the most indulgent ingredients in the world, certainly also one of the most expensive. And I'll tell you, or if you recall, we had a conversation very, very early on in our relationship. And obviously, I think Jared's beers are delicious, but one of the things he said was, I'm going to do what I do. You have to figure out how to make it work. So the
Spoken
first
like
beer
a true chef, Jared.
So the first beer we ever created was a shaved black truffle Pilsner, and it retailed for $120 a bottle. Now, that wasn't us, scouring the price into the market. The cost is just a reflection of the ingredients, right? For us, it actually starts with the product that we create and then build the business around it. And so, yes, crazy enough, we did have an overnight shipment of Perigord truffles from a farm in Western Australia that was very generous to work with us. But that was the foundation of that first beer, and thereafter, the merchandising program around it. And I think that's a good parallel for how we operate our business. Even if you look most recently at our restaurant in the West Village in New York, Moody Sushi, we started with one focus in mind, which is our Brewmaster tasting menu. It's a 15-course, tableside omakase experience where we pair different courses with different beers, right? Similar to our tasting menu experience, how it's showcased in the dining room in Chicago. And that's what we focused on when we opened up, and that was it, right? But more recently, we're starting to expand upon that. In fact, this weekend, we're expanding into a space next door and opening a hand roll and martini counter, right? So for us, it's first take one bite, make sure you're great at that bite, make sure the business around that bite makes sense, and then grow into the next thing, right? One of the things I try to tell our team, and I hope they trust me in this, is our goal is to be here for the long run, right? And in order to do that, you have to build a business that's sustainable from a number of different perspectives, right? It's not just margins, it's also your team. It's not just your team, it's also your guest, right? And your experience and whatnot. So yeah, I do think you can jump in and you can have 20 different offerings and you figure out quickly what works and what doesn't work, and you can shave here and then highlight there. For us, we've just taken a different perspective, which is we focus on one thing. And I think as long as guests enjoy beers and enjoy our beers and they enjoy elevated dining and quality dining experiences, we'll have an opportunity to succeed.
Jared, what was the inspiration to get into sushi? I mean, it seems like a slight departure, and it also feels like a risk. I mean, granted, it's amazing and the reviews are fabulous, but you're so talented, you could do anything. Why not do more of the same that works, as opposed to venturing into something new?
Josh, I love sushi. Like that's the starting point. I love sushi and I love drinking beer with sushi. And I noticed that there weren't many styles of beer that I could enjoy with sushi at the restaurants that I were frequenting. Yeah. And selfishly, I wanted more. And I thought that beer has so many complex flavors and aromatics. I thought it'd be fantastic to pair with different pieces of nigiri, sashimi, and it's minimalism. Beer in itself, you've got 4 ingredients. You've got hops, malt, yeast, water.
Nope, I'm here.
Lose you, Josh?
Nope,
I think we might have
I'm
lost
here.
Josh, but I do think it's still recorded.
It is. It is. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you see me? Hello? Hello, hello? Hello, hello? Hello, hello? Hello, hello? Hello, hello? Guys?
There we go.
I don't know what the fuck happened, but we're back and very excited to be back.
Should I start over?
Yes, that would not hurt.
Okay. Why sushi? I love sushi and I love beer. And just like in Chicago, I love fine dining and I love beer. And when I was going out to my favorite sushi restaurants, I noticed that the meal would begin with a light lager, traditionally like a rice lager. And then after that, it would move into sake or wine. Love sake, love wine, but I really love beer. And I wanted to have different styles of beer with different pieces of sushi. And sushi and beer at the core, it's all about minimalism, right? Like with beer, you have the 4 ingredients. You've got malt, you have hops, you have yeast, you have water. And then you can add additional ingredients like different layers of flavor. With sushi, it's actually quite similar. You've got your fish, you've got your rice, then you've got your vinegar in there for a little sour, and you've got your sugar in there for a little sweet. So minimalism. And then you can add different layers of flavor on top of that. And I thought the two together would be actually just really, really fantastic. And it's light eating. And I enjoy like eating light. And the bubbles in beer act just the same way the bubbles in champagne. They cleanse the palate so that every bite is a fresh bite. And that's what chef wants you to have. Every bite, fresh bite, and then you get to start all over again. And so I thought the idea of not only having sushi and beer, but having a tasting menu and omakase would just be the next chapter of Moody Tongue. And I've been wanting to do this for a little bit. COVID slowed me down, but we had an opportunity to do this in New York, and I couldn't be more excited. It's fun. It's really, really fun.
What the idea speaks to is this, and I can only speak for my own life and I guess the life of my clients as well. But every time I've tried to make something for someone else, I have failed, and it's cost me a fortune. But whenever I try and serve me, the messaging is perfect, the product is perfect, the service is perfect, because it's impossible to get inside someone else's head, but you can serve yourself to perfection. Have you guys found that, because I would assume at this stage in the game, I mean, with the 2 stars and all of the things, that you're presented with a lot of opportunities, some of which probably seem like, oh, this would be a light lift. How hard could this possibly be? Even though it falls outside of our scope. How are you determining like what's an opportunity and what's a distraction?
Well, good segue. Here's what I would say. You're 100% correct. We're very fortunate to have opportunities to, not just expand upon what we do, but also grow the business, right? We don't do anything unless we think we can do it 100%. And I'm sure you hear that a lot, but I think that having an element of self-restraint is important when thinking about the longevity of a business and thinking about, to some extent, we're stewards of our partner's capital, right? But we're also stewards of our team. And we have an obligation, not just as a fiduciary, but as good business managers, to only move forward with the opportunities we think have the highest return on investment being defined more broadly than just dollars. We will be opening another restaurant in New York very soon, but you can see it's, almost 2 years between our first restaurant and our second restaurant. Our initial focus has been executing Moody Sushi in the West Village, right? Frankly, it was 4 years between opening the location, the restaurant location in Chicago, and opening the first location in New York. So we are very fortunate, partially due to the accolade, I think partially due to our business and the beer and the food and the people and everything, to have the opportunity to grow and to have opportunities for folks to approach us and say, hey, would you consider this or that or whatever? But you just jump on something because you think you're going to, an easy, quick profit or way to expand into a market, you're going to undercut yourself because you're not doing your homework appropriately. And the last thing you want to do is undercut an operation you already have in business. Frankly, the highest return on investment for most dollars is in your existing business, right? We have a wholesale production brewery. We distribute in 12 states around the US and Northern Europe. That means there's 38 states we don't distribute in yet, right? So, why would we start another brewery when our current brewery can expand production and distribution? I mean, well, similarly on the restaurant side, right? Until we feel, we're maximizing any individual location, it doesn't really make sense for us to spread ourselves too thin. So, yes, we are growing the business and we're trying to grow the business. We have the new restaurant opening very shortly here. However, we don't look at legitimately growing the business until we feel we can do so at the same quality level that we've been executing previously. And maybe we haven't grown as quickly as we could have over the past 10 years because of that. But by contrast, we're very fortunate to have made it through COVID and be in a sound position and have supportive partners and a supportive team. So who knows what's going to happen? But again, like to our original premise, I think if you underwrite the business conservatively, if you operate with quality team members and you have great products, great food and beverage and service, then you'll be in business.
New York has become a graveyard for great restaurants. There's no way to ignore the fact that it's been a really, really difficult market for proven operators out there. Why the expansion into New York? How did it change the dynamics of the business, and why continue? What do you think has helped you thrive in what is an incredibly difficult market?
Well, New York is, certainly one of the premier culinary cities in the country, if not the world. And I think for our brand and our approach to beer, it has made sense as a natural extension of what we're doing. Now, frankly, New York is also not a surprise, as Jared and I both have family in New York. In fact, I have family that's going to be living 2 blocks from our new restaurant. We both lived in New York for a while. Jared obviously studied the Culinary Institute of America. He worked at Per Se. I was working in New York before moving to Chicago. So New York, while yes, a very intimidating city and certainly incredibly competitive with a number of wonderful restaurants and bars. I mean, the reason it's very difficult is because there's a lot of great people there already doing great things. But at the end of the day, I do believe that what we offer is genuinely very differentiated, right? To a point you made earlier. There really isn't anyone elevating the traditional beer, the beer dining experience. That's what we do. right? So when we go into the West Village, when we look elsewhere, we are looking at the other restaurants in the neighborhood. There's no one who does what we do. So if there are folks interested in beer or in beer-centric dining, right, we feel comfortable going into a neighborhood or a community and trying to build relationships. So yeah, New York is certainly scary. I think the operating cost, the overhead threshold is much greater. There's certainly a lot more people there, more densely populated, just walking around every block. But I think your success there is a measure, of a combination of both, obviously success, not success, luck, but also the quality of what you do, the uniqueness of what you do, and the location where you do it. So yeah, it's a very difficult market. I would not want to open with a generic restaurant in New York, just because why go to a generic restaurant when the most exceptional Thai food is around the corner, or Indian food is, a few blocks away, or Chinese food is in Chinatown, right? We only compete with what we do and what we know what we're good at, right? What we've spoken to earlier. We like to serve ourselves, right? So, we focus on what we think we do the best, and that's the foot we put forward.
And the next restaurant you're opening is a replication, right? Your first.
The next restaurant will be a different concept. Will also be in New York, a different culinary concept. One of the things I should speak to, I kind of wanted to comment on earlier when you brought up, and you said, why go into sushi? Because it's different from what you've done previously. Frankly, for us, our concept is elevating the beer-centric dining experience, right? That can be paired with a number of different cuisines. Yes, in Chicago, we have our executive chef, James, showcasing this kind of contemporary American or globally inspired, you can see the air quotes, right?
Yes.
Cuisine. In the West Village, we work with our executive chef, Hiromi Iwakiri, showcasing Japanese cuisine, specifically, of course, sushi. However, for us, we look for cuisines and we look for opportunities that pair well with our beers and with beers. So no, when we expand, we're actually fortunate. It's more about finding the cuisine or a cuisine that we're excited about or interested in that can pair well with beers and or specifically our beers, and then finding the right culinary partners with whom to execute that.
And as it relates to location, how much does that influence the process? Are you guys looking for great spots and then developing the concept around it? Or are you developing the concept and then looking for a spot that meets the needs of the business?
It's a great question. You're asking some guys who have never known anything about location historically. For the first 10 years in business, we had the worst location in town, right? You think about a production brewery, we've always been located in industrial neighborhoods, right? Least expensive real estate, but also zero foot traffic, right? In Chicago, we were originally founded in the Pilsen neighborhood. Right now, we're at the nexus of Bronzeville and the South Loop neighborhoods. There is no foot traffic. I would show you outside. We're across from a vacant lot right now. For us, I suppose as a result, we've been forced to create a product because we've always been a destination, right? Truthfully, going into New York City and the West Village is the first time we've literally ever been in a desirable location, right? We're at the intersection of 10th and Waverly in the West Village. When I lived in New York 10 years ago before moving to Chicago, I remember walking around, younger Jeremy, and this area. So for us, what I would tell you is location has really not been a part of our equation until the last year and a half. Now, of course, what I will say is it's nice to be in a wonderful location, but you want to make sure that you're in a community that supports you, that's excited about what you're doing, right? Just like I'm sure you've experienced in the past. You want to have folks in the neighborhood who love to come in, enjoy what you do on more than just a once basis. But also, you want to make sure that if you're paying a little bit more for rent, then you have the foot traffic that can accommodate that overhead. And we've got a really wonderful landlord partner in New York who's been very supportive of us, which also always isn't the case when you're in a high demand space, right? If you're in Chicago in the heart of the West Loop, or if you're in New York in the heart of the West Village, oftentimes when landlords have an exceptional location, they maintain all the leverage in the context of the relationship. We've been very fortunate to have very supportive landlord partners, here in the South Loop in Chicago and in New York in the West Village.
What should we steal from you, from both of you? Like, for the people that are listening, they're looking to improve their lives. They're looking to improve their businesses. There's some things that you've done that are entirely unique to you. but there are some tactics, some tools, some strategies that we could all adopt and benefit from. What should we steal?
Jared, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Why don't you go first?
Okay. Look, in listening to this conversation here, I think my one consistent takeaway is to keep your blinders on, right? Do what you do well. And to your point, serve yourself, right? In other words, don't chase trends, right? Don't unnecessarily try to, trim the fat, cut expenses, right? First start with a great product and great experience, and then build around that, right? If you don't start out of the gate by delivering an exceptional experience to your guests, you're just never going to have their trust and they're never going to come back. In fact, frankly, I would tell you from our perspective, business follows the product, right? First develop the product, then develop the business, right? Back to step one, Jared creates a beer with black truffle, right? But then figure out how to merchandise it, right? Separately, here in Chicago, create a 15 plus course tasting menu, prefix tasting menu experience with beer pairings. Then figure out how to merchandise it, right? First, focus on what you're creating, and then focus on making sure that it's a solid, sustainable, profitable business that's supportive of a venture that can last for a long time.
That was a good answer, Jeremy.
That was a good answer, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think my direction is a little different. I think what I've learned, I don't know about, stealing, but what I might suggest is surround yourself with talented people that you admire. Whether it's Chef James and our GM Daniel, or in Chicago, or GM Jake and Chef Romy in New York, or just Jeremy. The people on our team, or Brewmaster Will, I admire them. I think what they do is truly excellent, and I'm proud to be surrounded by them and on their team. And it's made this whole experience fun. And when we have a new challenge, we can kind of throw it to a bunch of different people that approach problems differently. So I think if you can find someone that you trust and that is great at what they do, bring them on the team. And that's really made the journey a lot more exciting. It's made our product a lot better, and it's made this whole experience a good time.
That was great, guys.